My furry sister wants us to call her by her cat name. A few months ago, my sister decided she was a cat. Not in the cute, I love cats kind of way, but in the full-blown, I am a cat way. At first, I brushed it off like it was one of those weird teenage phases when she decided she was going to be a magician and walked around with a deck of cards in her pocket for a month. I figured it'd pass, but oh no, this wasn't just a phase. She really committed to the bit. She started walking around with these ridiculous cat ears perched on her head, a fluffy tail pinned to the back of her pants, and to top it all off, she even started wearing this weird, sparkly collar with a little bell that jingled every time she moved. You might think this was just a home thing, something she'd only do where no one else could see her. But nope, she wore that stuff to school too. Can you imagine the looks she got? I cringed just thinking about it. High school isn't exactly known for its warm embrace of individuality, and sure enough, she got bullied for it. I heard the whispers in the hallway, saw the way people snickered behind her back. But when I tried to talk to her about it, she just shrugged me off, saying, "People are just jealous of my bravery. They wish they could be as true to themselves as I am." I didn't know what to say to that. How do you argue with someone who's convinced they're a cat? It wasn't long before her cat persona started seeping into every part of our lives. One night, I came downstairs to grab a snack, and there she was, on all fours in the kitchen, lapping milk out of a bowl. I stood there, staring at her in disbelief, thinking maybe I was seeing things. But no, she was really doing it. I asked her what she was doing, but she didn't even bother looking up. She just kept drinking, like it was the most normal thing in the world. I was baffled. Part of me wanted to laugh, but another part of me was genuinely worried. This was beyond quirky. It was downright bizarre. The next day, my parents and I had a family meeting. We'd had enough of the whole cat thing and decided it was time to confront her about it. When we sat her down, she looked at us with this intense, almost defiant expression and declared, "I am a cat. You need to respect that. And by the way, I want you to buy me cat food from now on." My parents exchanged glances, clearly at a loss. They must have figured it would pass, so they gave in, probably thinking she'd try the cat food once, hate it, and move on to something else. But to everyone's surprise, she actually liked it. I mean, she threw up after eating it, but she still liked it. And she kept eating it, despite the obvious consequences. It was like she was so committed to this identity that she was willing to endure anything, even a churning stomach, just to keep it up. The whole situation was getting more and more surreal, and I found myself constantly questioning whether this was all some elaborate joke she was playing on us. But the thing is, she never broke character. Not once. Then, last night, we reached a new level of weirdness. We were having dinner, and as usual, she was on the floor with her bowl of cat food. Suddenly, she stopped eating, sat up, and looked at us with this serious expression. Then she announced, "I no longer identify as a human. From now on, you will call me Mrs. Whiskers." My dad just about lost it. He slammed his hand on the table and yelled that she was going to therapy whether she liked it or not. My sister, or should I say Mrs. Whiskers, didn't even flinch. She just got up on all fours and strutted out of the room, her tail swishing behind her. As she walked away, I couldn't help myself. I joked about taking her to the animal shelter, but instead of laughing, my parents gave me this look, like I was the crazy one. And that's when it hit me. Maybe she was onto something. Think about it. Cats have it pretty good. They get to nap all day, they don't have to deal with school or work, and they get pampered by humans who worship the ground they walk on. Who wouldn't want that kind of life? After dinner, I sat in my room, replaying the whole thing in my head. I couldn't shake this weird feeling. Maybe my sister wasn't just being weird for the sake of it. Maybe she'd figured something out that the rest of us hadn't. What if, in some strange way, she was living her best life? The more I thought about it, the more I started to see things from her perspective. Maybe she was tired of the pressures of being human, of all the expectations and responsibilities that came with it. Maybe this was her way of breaking free from all of that. But then another thought crept into my mind, a thought I couldn't ignore. What if this wasn't just about her wanting to be a cat? What if something deeper was going on, something none of us had noticed? She'd always been a little different, but this was on a whole new level. What if this was her way of crying out for help, of trying to tell us something she couldn't put into words? The thought sent a chill down my spine. What if we'd been so focused on the cat stuff that we'd missed the bigger picture? The next morning, I decided to talk to her. Not in a confrontational way, but just to see if she was okay. I found her in her room, curled up in a ball on her bed, purring softly. I sat down next to her and hesitated for a moment before asking, "Hey, are you all right? Like, really all right?" She opened one eye and looked at me with a kind of weary resignation, then rolled over onto her back, stretching out like a cat. "I'm fine," she said. But there was something in her voice that didn't quite match the words. I wasn't convinced, but I didn't want to push her too hard. Instead, I decided to do a little digging on my own. I started paying more attention to her behavior, to the little things she said and did when she thought no one was watching. And the more I watched, the more I realized that maybe this wasn't just about being a cat. She seemed to be pulling away from the world, retreating into this cat persona as a way to escape from something she couldn't handle. But what? I remembered how she used to be before all of this started. How she used to be so full of life, always making plans for the future, always talking about the things she wanted to do. But now, it was like she'd given up on all of that. It was like she'd decided that being a human was too much, and that being a cat was easier. I felt a knot forming in my stomach as I realized how blind I'd been. I'd been so focused on the weirdness of it all that I hadn't stopped to think about what might be driving it. A few days later, I tried talking to her again, but this time I approached it differently. I told her that I was worried about her, that I missed the way things used to be between us. She didn't say much at first, just listened with that same weary expression. But then, after a long silence, she finally spoke. "It's hard being a person," she said quietly, almost to herself. "There's so much you have to worry about, so many things you have to do. Being a cat, it's simpler. You don't have to think so much." Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. I realized then that this wasn't just about her wanting to be a cat. It was about her trying to escape from the pressures of life, from the things that scared her or made her feel like she wasn't enough. And in that moment, I felt an overwhelming sense of guilt. I'd been so quick to dismiss her behavior as just another phase, another quirky thing she was doing for attention. But now I saw it for what it really was, a cry for help. I knew then that this was bigger than just a weird teenage phase. This was something that needed to be addressed, not just laughed off or ignored. So I made a decision. I wasn't going to let her go through this alone. I wasn't going to stand by and watch her retreat further into this fantasy world she'd created. I was going to be there for her, no matter what it took. Over the next few weeks, I spent more time with her, talking to her, trying to understand what she was going through. Slowly, she started to open up to me, telling me about the things that had been weighing on her, the fears and insecurities that had been eating away at her. It wasn't easy, and there were still days when she would retreat back into her cat persona, but I could see that she was trying. She was trying to find her way back to being herself again. One night, as we were sitting in her room talking, she suddenly turned to me and said, "Maybe I don't have to be a cat all the time. Maybe I can just be me, and that's okay too." It was a small step, but it was a step in the right direction, and in that moment, I felt a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, things were going to be okay. And then, just when I thought we were starting to turn a corner, the twist came. We were sitting at the dinner table, her, my parents, and I, when she suddenly looked up and said, "I've decided I want to try being a dog for a while, just to see how it feels." I nearly choked on my food, and my parents just stared at her in stunned silence. It was like we were right back to square one.